lovely to be here. It's very much amongst old friends. It's always a pleasure to be at the Asia Society. This evening I thought, here we are at the last weeks of the exhibition. It's been an extraordinary moment, I think, to bring the Belitung tongue shipwreck highlights to Asia Society. It's an extraordinary discovery, one which has really, in many ways, been transformative in terms of our understanding of late first millennium international trade. We're talking of the Indian Ocean network that extended from Basra. We all know Basra as a military post serving Baghdad in the recent grim history of that region. It was a military base, of course, in the late first millennium as well, and a major international port, linked directly, surprisingly, all the way to South China. We'd always taken the view that the trade system that spanned the longest known navigation route in history at that time, which was from the Persian Gulf to southern China, that this was conducted in staged journeys, and goods were transported, deposited in entrepôts, and then moved onwards in a series, in a chain of exchange. What's become evident from the discovery of the Belitung tongue shipwreck is that whilst the former certainly happened, something else also happened. Vessels which traveled the entire journey from Persian Gulf all the way to the major ports of late first millennium South China. This was a revelation and became clear when in 1998, 99, the Belitung was discovered in shallow waters off Belitung Island, which is near Bangka in West Java Sea, midway between Java and South Sumatra. And the site was identified, as is routinely the case, by fishermen, and they engaged in a certain amount of what we call cherry picking. We're only dealing with 20 meters of water here. They were diving, collecting items from the surface, and these were finding their way to the more famous antique streets of Jakarta, Jalan Surabaya being one of the most eminent ones. And within weeks of this process starting, I had people walking in my door at the V&A in London showing me pieces. They've been FedExed over, obviously, if FedEx existed then, I guess it did, in 98. And these items were clearly staggering quality and, more importantly, conditions, such that I was quite skeptical of it. We all know what Changsha wares look like. I've seen many hundreds in archaeological contexts in Southeast Asia over the previous decades. I'd never seen anything in this condition. It must be very skillful reproduction. Where's this coming from? I was proved wrong, of course. The cargo consisted of in excess of 60,000 artifacts recovered from the immediate vicinity of the barge we disappeared and disintegrated ship's hull. That's not the entire composition of the cargo. There was clearly more material. Shard material remains on the floor, the floor bed of the seabed, and of course there were unquestionably other important commodities on the vessel which have entirely perished and gone without trace. And I signal that caveat very carefully because the commercial value of many of these cargoes may well have been embodied in silk textiles, which was a high-value commodity, also carried on vessels like this, and of course no trace remains after a millennium in the sea. So that's the evidence that that is entirely gone. The gap is simply a gap in our knowledge. So here we have a remarkable discovery. What I want to do this evening is contextualize it for you a little. What was happening in the 8th and 9th centuries in the Indian Ocean world. It was a very dynamic period, and it has a long history that precedes it. Look at this, look at the exchange, some of the conversations that are going on, both in terms of technology and in terms of style, between the Persian Gulf world. I roll Iran and Iraq into one stylistic entity in this period, and what's happening in China. And of course in China we have to draw distinctions between the core of China, Han China, and the regions in the first millennium south of the Yangtze, which were still to varying degrees outside Han culture, the southern territories, and the ports which served the great international trade were to a large degree beyond the control of central China. This is a very important point. Guangdong, Fujian particularly, these were regions in the late first millennium that still were not fully integrated, just as Yunnan was not really fully integrated until the Yuan period, really very late in China's history. It was another world. This was the Yue world, which related culturally much more to North Tonkin, to northern Vietnam, and was looking southward and outwards, whereas the interior heartland of China, Han China, was looking north and northwest, and of course had been using the overland Silk Route for many, many centuries. What's often not appreciated is the maritime Silk Route was also, can't quantify this, I was going to say equally important, but it was certainly important as well, and played a very important part in China, extending its mercantile activity, but also its knowledge of foreign lands. And we have diplomatic contacts coming via the sea routes from the 2nd, 3rd century. These appear in the dynastic histories which have come down on the Chinese side. Almost no written record from the countries where these embassies were dispatched. So the regions we're dealing with extend from Persian Gulf. Red Sea is also important, but that tends to be a slightly later phase of the story. The Red Sea trade operating to the west coast of India. Annual fleets were sailing from the region around Aden, and they of course linked up to Alexandria and the Mediterranean trade. So very important as well. But the long distance trade, which is going really from Basra, the other great port is Basra in Iraq, and Siraf in Iran, on the northern coast of the shores of the Persian Gulf, were the two great ports which were engaged in the trade with the regions of the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, the South China Sea, which the Chinese refer to as the Nanhai, the Southern Sea, and then these series of ports, Guangdong, Quanzhou, Ningbo, Hangzhou, and Yuanzhou, and each of these were heavily involved in international trade from an early period, but came to really galvanized in the 8th and 9th centuries. We see a commercial explosion taking place across Asia, which involves intense international maritime trade. And the reasons for this are not entirely clear. Much of it may have been internal to China and the demand from elites for exotic goods coming from Southeast Asia and West Asia, and we have a growing demand from Buddhist institutions, temple establishments demanding aromatics, sandalwood and others, in great quantities, so literally going up in smoke. But these commodities were very, very important in the dynamics of this trade. But the contact goes back much, much earlier. We have evidence for Indian traders operating in Southeast Asia from the early centuries BC now. We have inscribed ceramic pieces found in Southeast Asia, and also in the peninsula region, but also in North Coast Bali, for example. Polished roletted wares we know were produced on the southeast coast of India in the early centuries AD. There have been items found just in the last 5 years in the Thai Peninsula which give us the archaeological evidence for Indian trade contact back into the early centuries BC. So the story gets extended and extended, and I'm sure as the archaeology continues and is more rigorous, the story will go back even further. One of the wonderful discoveries, a local discovery found in the southern Thai Peninsula, I show it here, it's found at a small